Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Wayne, and I'm going to be your nerd of a guy taking you through this fantastic journey of analyzing video games and looking way too deep into their structure and development for the sake of entertaining maybe a few people. I was inspired to get into these shenanigans by such fantastic people as Gerard the Completionist, John Tron, and some call me Johnny. Speaking of inspirations, I thought that a great place to start this whole mess is with a game that has inspired me to do quite a lot, from writing stories to designing characters to even pursuing a career in game development. This game started out as a humble little labor of love of one man and one man alone. This is Cave Story.
Meet Daisuke Amaya. This is a young man living in Japan who sort of led the charge for successful indie developers. For about 5 years or so, Amaya worked on this little game in his spare time and eventually released it for free on the PC in 2004. You can actually still go on that site today and download the original version of the game for free if you so wish. The game was styled in familiar fashion to the games that Amaya played as a child, like Metroid, and it definitely shows. After the game had developed a bit of a cult following, the license for the game was picked up by the independent developer Nicholas, and the slew of Cave Story re-releases began in 2010. Don't know what I'm talking about? Well, so far we have a version on the PC, one on the WiiWare, DSi, 3DS eShop, Steam, another version for the 3DS with 3D model, and, most recently, one for the Nintendo Switch.
And because I have no self-control whatsoever, I own every single version of this game today.
A few little additions and features, such as cleaner and more detailed graphics, some retranslated dialogue, and some remixes of the soundtrack were added to the new releases of the game, but you'll find people in the fan community somewhat divided on which versions of things like the graphics and music they prefer. Personally, I prefer the newer graphics, but I still love the original mix of the soundtrack the most, though I do still think the remastered version created for Cave Story 3D is pretty nice.
But the version that we're going to be looking at today is Cave Story Plus for the Nintendo Switch. After all, this is the most recent and most relevant version of the game. And it has a thing or two that I think helps it stand above the other versions, but more about all that later. But enough of all that junk. Let's jump into the game proper, shall we?
Welcome to Cave Story. It might look like a super simple and fun story at first, but believe me, this game does not take too long to jump into the dark and creepy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Just a warning, I will be analyzing the story of this game, so if you care about story spoilers, keep an eye out for timestamps so I don't give too much away for you. Upon starting the game, you find your little pale hat-wearing hero waking up in a cave and exploring it a bit, while scenes of a mysterious figure named Kazuma keep popping in while he searches for his sister Sue. With just a little looking around, your character, who you later find is named Quote, will find an old sleeping man who has left his weapon unguarded, and because you're the hero of this story and fight for good, you steal it from him, and that's how you obtain the first part of your arsenal, the Polar Star. After just a little more exploration, Quote falls into a small village housing these little puppy bunny things called the Mamiga, led by this adorable little warrior named King. After two henchmen, Balrog and Misery, working for some ominous evil being known only as the Doctor, kidnap a little Mamiga named Toriko, who is believed to be this Sue that everyone seems so obsessed with. Quote is enlisted to go out to find Sue, rescue Toriko, and save the Mamiga from the tyranny of the Doctor. The adventure seems to be going pretty well. You find Sue, her brother Kazuma, and a man called Professor Booster, who apparently came with Kazuma, Sue, their mother, and the Doctor, and this tool named Ido was in there somewhere, as part of a scientific expedition to investigate the floating island in the sky that you've actually been in this whole time, before the Doctor stole something called the Demon Crown and went crazy, turning Ito and Sue into Mamiga and separating the group. The Doctor has been kidnapping the Mamiga because he wants to force them all together to eat these red flowers that will turn them into ravenous beasts so he can form an army to take over the surface world. Professor Booster seems to think that Quote is the best person to help because, as it turns out, the young man is actually part of an army of killer robots who were sent to the island from the surface to destroy all of the Mamiga before they could be made into a threat. The gang discovers where the red flowers are being kept, and so it's a race against the clock in the Sand Zone to get there before the Doctor does. In the Sand Zone, you meet Curly Brace, another robot, like Quote, who fights you at first but comes to trust you after discovering that you're there to protect the Mamiga same as her. She even offers to trade your Polar Star for her machine gun. Seems like a tempting offer, right? You bet. So you should turn it down. I'll explain why later. Then you find some old lady named Jenka and have to go find her stupid dogs for her since she's the only one with the key to the warehouse with the red flowers. She still isn't willing to give you the key, but Balrog shows up and takes it by force. You make it to the warehouse, But you're too late. The doctor is already here, and he's forced Toriko to eat a red flower and fatally wounded King. You're forced to take out Toriko, and in his last breath, King gives you his sword just before dying. You're caught by Balrog, and Misery shows up to send both of you off to some place called the Labyrinth. You find Curly, get her some medicine, leave her with doctors, the good kind, fight a giant robot being driven by a cat, ignore friends in need, more on that later. You catch up with Curly, catch up with Balrog, fight Balrog, convince him to help you escape, kill stuff with Curly, and find this torn down lab area with destroyed robots all around it and also a tow rope. If you're a good little hero and leave people to die, again, more on that later. Turns out, this is where the core of the island lives, and it wakes up and tries to kill you, but you kill it first. Mostly, anyway. The whole place starts to flood and you pass out, and some foreshadowing shows up on screen. You wake up and find Curly passed out. Apparently, she gave you her bubble shield, so now you can breathe underwater. If you got the tow rope, no, really, trust me, I'll explain it all later, you can tie her to you and escape with her to a cabin where you can drain the water from her system. Take her with you again, and you'll get attacked by this cyborg guppy, and Curly is separated from you yet again. Then, it's back to where you began. You wake up in Mimiga Village, but now it's empty. Barren. You find Professor Booster, and he tells you that the doctor has taken all of the Mimiga and is growing more red flowers for his army. Well, you're not about to settle for that, so the professor gives you the Booster 2.0, and now you can fly around a bit. Go back to the cave where you started the game in, and get the best gun in the game, and then it's back to the egg corridor where you saved Sue earlier in the game. But while the egg corridor was all colorful and fun and full of life, now it's falling apart, and baby dragons have hatched out of the eggs, scared and dying. You make it to the end of the corridor, and Kazuma is waiting for you. He wants to escape with the last dragon and asks if you want to come along.
And this is where I need to give out a little spoiler warning. If you care about story spoilers for this game, skip to this time spot in the video. Alright, we good?
You can actually end the game right here if you go with Kazuma. You can just fly off into the night with him and leave the characters on the island and all the people on the surface to die. It's obviously considered one of the bad endings, but it's an option. If you want to see this through to the end, you decline his offer and scale the outside of the island until you make it to the plantation. Sue and the Mimiga have been captured and imprisoned here, and after trying to use the teleporter room, you get captured too. Sue was taken away after you were thrown into prison with her, but she leaves you a letter telling you that her mother is hiding somewhere in the plantation. After reading the letter, an escape route shows up, and you make your way out of the prison to find Sue's mom and run a few errands for her until she has a device ready for you that can get you to the lair of the doctor. Before you take it though, you gotta check for Curly, cause she's here in the plantation now too, but she's lost her memory. So now you gotta go back to Mimiga Village, talk to shrooms, fight shrooms, pump Curly full of shrooms, and suddenly she can remember again. You have to leave her here for now, but don't worry, you'll see her again. Also, talk to this dog that shows up when the flying machine is ready. He'll give you an extra energy tank. So you fly to the top of the plantation, run through one last cave, and find yourself at the island's balcony, which is full of rabid Mimiga. You encounter Misery, beat her, and then face the doctor, beat both of his phases, and go up to the core. Misery is there and has Sue as a hostage, but surprise! The doctor's existence is still hanging tight onto this world, and transforms the core, Misery, and Sue into beasts to fight you. Of course, you beat them, cause you're good at video games, and the island starts to fall apart. You escape with Sue and the others, and congrats! You won the game.
That is, unless you're going for the best ending. I've been dodging around this the whole video, but there's an ultimate ending to the game that takes a bit of work to get to.
It all begins with Professor Booster in the labyrinth. For some stupid reason, talking to him after he falls from the ceiling will guarantee that the tow rope will not appear later and you cannot get the best ending. He also dies if you talk to him, but lives if you don't? What? You also guarantee that you can't get the best jetpack, which, again, jeopardizes your ability to complete the final area.
And look, I know I'm not the first person to complain about this part of the game, but I don't care. It's stupid, it sucks for the first time player, and it's just really poorly shoehorned in. But I won't dwell on it for too long.
From there, you have to make sure that you grab the tow rope before fighting the core and tie Curly to you after the lab floods. Drain her and make sure you take her with her when you leave the cabin. Then, when you get the booster from Professor Booster, you can fly back up to where you began the game and go back to where you got the Polar Star. The old man that you took it from is mad that you stole it at first, but softens up and completes the weapon for you, giving you the Spur. And honestly, once I have the Spur, I find little reason to use any other gun. It is just so good. And for those those of you wondering, this is why you should turn down Curly's offer for her machine gun, because if you take her up on it, no spur for you. As cool as getting the spur is, I feel like it's made all the better by this one line the man has after giving you the gun. It stands as one of the coolest and most inspirational things I think I've ever read. I love this. Next, when you're in the plantation, you need to talk to the green cloaked man next to Curly, and he'll tell you about the mushroom that will recover her memory, which you need to go get and feed to Curly. From there, you should be set until you're running to the helicopter with Sue at the end. Instead of escaping, you need to run into this cabin, and congrats. You're about to enter the final area, the Bloodstained Sanctuary. The difficulty spike in this place is ridiculous, and when you finally make it to the end, you need to defeat this guardian as well as 4 forms of Balos, a being of immense power who created the demon crown itself.
And guess what? No checkpoints. At all.
If you die here, even at the last moment of the last phase of the last fight, you're going back to the beginning of this place. Take your time, stay calm, get Curly, use your spur, and level up your missile launcher, and you should be fine, but it will probably take you a few tries. The ending feels worth it though. Balos dies, the island goes up in smoke, and Balrog comes to save you and Curly, and then the 3 of you go off to live a happy, carefree life somewhere in the distance. Still, wow. This is one of the most complex and difficult methods of achieving the definitive ending of a game I think I've ever experienced. That being said, it's not a terribly long game. Maybe 4 or 5 hours, and this is the kind of game that feels good to master, so it feels like the effort was worth it in the end. Which leads me to the actual gameplay perspective of this gem. As I mentioned before, Cave Story was designed to closely resemble Metroidvania-style games, though I'd say the exploration aspects of Cave Story are toned down a bit. Don't get me wrong, there are things to find if you go looking for them, but it largely amounts to new guns and health containers. Still, the little sound that plays when you get a new health container really gives you an idea of what inspired this game. The main focus of Cave Story is a bit more action-oriented. Make it from point A to point B and blow stuff up along the way. That's kind of what it comes down to. Each weapon in your arsenal can be leveled up by collecting these little Doritos that come out of fallen enemies or destroyed containers. By filling up the weapon's meter, you send it up to the next level where it becomes more powerful and useful. But if you get hit, your weapon loses some XP, so you need to be mindful about how you travel through areas. You can't just mindlessly jump into a mass of enemies and expect to come out unscathed. If you don't die, your weapons will likely be damaged, and that means more nacho farming to get your guns back up to snuff. Like I mentioned before, you can find new weapons throughout your adventure, but honestly, I would hate to give away too much of how these weapons are obtained. To me, a huge part of what made this game so much fun to me when I was playing through it for the first time was discovering things like the off-the-wall way to get the bubble line. I won't and cannot spoil this stuff for you. This is the sort of thing you're gonna have to discover on your own. There's a pretty wide variety of enemies to take out in the game, but they generally go down after just a few hits. The bosses, on the other hand, take a bit more strategy to not get killed by, but not much. Honestly, this is not what I would call an especially difficult game, and the bosses don't do a lot to change that. Now that being said, I can only say that's half true for the bosses of the secret final area, but I won't say too much for the sake of those who wanted to avoid spoilers. There is a bit of platforming in Cave Story, but I wouldn't really say it gets very in-depth. Again, with the exception of the final area, but I won't show that here.
To be honest, I was kind of concerned about how this game was going to play on the Switch. The little buttons in place of a normal D-pad don't look ideal for precision platforming in a 2D game. But, to my surprise, the analog stick is actually really comfortable for this game.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
Another aspect of the Switch version of the game that I would really like to highlight revolves around a change that fixes one of my biggest issues with every other version of the game: the dogs. Originally, when collecting Jenka's dogs for her, you could only carry one with you at a time, so you had to run all over the place in the sand zone for a tedious amount of time to complete this mission. Now, in the Switch version, the location of one of the dogs has been moved from near the warehouse to a location on the way to the boss you fight right before you get to Jenka's house, which is much more convenient, but even better than that, you can carry all the dogs at once. I nearly shed a tear the first time I saw Quote running around with all those dogs on his head. though admittedly it was partly out of laughter. If you're looking for a little bit to do after the game is over, there's still fun to be had. There are some extra challenges like a boss rush, and a fun challenge called the Wind Fortress. There's even a new one exclusive to the Switch version, but I'd rather not spoil it here. There's also a way to play through the game as Curly Brace. Unlocking her campaign is a little weird though. When you're at her house in the sand zone, you have to jump through some invisible walls and make it to behind her bed, check the ground and find...
So this game has really good music.
For real though, this soundtrack is fantastic. It's upbeat, nostalgic, and so much fun. The more serious tracks really help add a new level of depth to the darker undertones the game unveils later on too. From the menu, you can actually change what version of the soundtrack plays throughout the game, which is an option I greatly appreciate. In a recent update, the option was also added to use the original graphics while playing, which is cool and all, but I still prefer the newer ones. Nothing is above improvement, and I don't think that the graphics of Cave Story are an exception.
So, all in all, I'd say this is a pretty solid game. It's short, but I think it offers up a pretty decent amount of replay value. And the ride is just a lot of fun. But that leads us into the main question of the review. Do I recommend this game? I do.
It's not perfect. Some of the stupid ways the path to the secret ending is set up is a testament to that, but what the game gets right, it excels at, and it's easy to see how Cave Story helped pave the way for successful indie games.
And with so many versions of this game available, including the original freeware version you can still download to your PC right now, it's almost impossible for me not to recommend that you give this game a shot. Well, I certainly hope that you enjoyed this first review on my channel, and I hope you'll be back next week for when I look at... What am I going to be playing again? See you next mission.